There are some people who enter our lives quietly and leave behind words that stay in our hearts forever. This is not simply a story about death. It is a story about learning how to truly live. In a world obsessed with success, money, achievement, and endless distraction, one dying professor spent the final months of his life teaching lessons far more important than fame or ambition. His name was Morrie Schwartz. And for one former student named Mitch Albom, reconnecting with Morrie would slowly transform the way he understood love, happiness, family, and the meaning of being human. What began as a simple visit would become a series of conversations that touched millions of hearts around the world. These conversations would later become the unforgettable book, Tuesdays with Morrie. Tonight, let us step into those final Tuesdays together. Slowly, quietly, and perhaps by the end of this story, we may discover something about our own lives too. The Louisville of the Mitch Albom still remembered the spring of 1979, the day he graduated from Brandeis University. Like many young people standing on the edge of adulthood, Mitch believed the world was waiting for him. Success felt close. Life felt limitless. After receiving his diploma, he walked toward his favorite professor, Morrie Schwartz, carrying a small gift, a monogrammed briefcase. During his years at Brandeis, Mitch had taken nearly every sociology class Morrie taught. But what made Morrie unforgettable was not simply his intelligence. It was his warmth, his gentleness, the way he listened to people as if they truly mattered. As they hugged goodbye, Morrie began to cry. Mitch promised they would stay in touch. But like many promises made in youth, life slowly carried him away. Years passed. Morrie grew older. Then one day, his body began to betray him. He was diagnosed with ALS, a devastating disease that slowly destroys the nervous system, trapping a fully awake mind inside a dying body. At first, Morrie lost the ability to dance. For most people, it may have seemed small. But Morrie loved dancing. He danced at church. He danced in workshops. He danced simply because being alive filled him with joy. And now, little by little, even that joy was being taken away. Still, Morrie refused to drown in bitterness. His wife, Charlotte, cared for him lovingly while continuing her work as a professor at MIT, because Morrie insisted she continue living her life fully. Meanwhile, 16 years after graduating from Brandeis, Mitch was living a very different life than the one he once imagined. He had abandoned his dream of becoming a musician, and instead became a successful sports journalist in Detroit. On the surface, Mitch had everything people are taught to chase: money, recognition, career success. But deep inside, something felt empty. After the death of his uncle from pancreatic cancer, Mitch began working even harder, as though staying busy could protect him from pain. He spent endless hours away from home. He kept telling his wife, Janine, that someday they would slow down, someday they would start a family. But someday kept moving further away. Then one night, while flipping through television channels, Mitch suddenly froze. He recognized a familiar voice. It was Morrie. Older now. Weaker. Sitting in a wheelchair. Morrie was being interviewed on the television program Nightline by Ted Koppel. And yet somehow, despite facing death, Morrie seemed more alive than anyone else on the screen. Before the interview even began, Morrie gently asked Ted Koppel a simple question. What is close to your heart? The famous journalist was caught off guard. But in that moment, the conversation changed. Because Morrie had a rare gift. He made people stop performing and start being human again. Watching from his living room, Mitch felt something awaken inside him. The next day, he contacted Morrie. Soon after, he traveled from Detroit to Morrie's home in West Newton, Massachusetts. But when Mitch arrived outside the house, he stayed in his car, finishing a phone call with his producer. At the time, it seemed important. Later, he would deeply regret wasting even those few extra minutes. Because time, he would soon learn, was becoming painfully precious. Not long after reconnecting with Morrie, Mitch traveled to London to cover the Wimbledon tennis tournament. There, surrounded by reporters chasing celebrities and gossip, something inside him began to shift. At one point, he was physically knocked aside by reporters, desperately pursuing Andre Agassi and Brooke Shields. And suddenly Mitch realized, this is what my life has become. Running. Chasing. Always chasing. Fame. Deadlines. Attention. But never peace. Never meaning. When he returned home, he learned that the article he had worked tirelessly on would not even be published due to a newspaper strike. For the first time in years, the world Mitch had built around work began to crack. And through those cracks, Morrie's voice kept returning. So Mitch went back to Boston. Then he returned again the following Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. Soon, Tuesdays became sacred. Each week, Mitch sat beside his dying professor and listened as Morrie shared lessons about life, love, aging, forgiveness, fear, family, and death itself. Mitch often brought food for Morrie. At first, Morrie could still eat small meals. But as the disease progressed, even swallowing became difficult. Slowly, his body weakened more and more. In one interview, Morrie admitted the thing he feared most was the day he would no longer be able to clean himself after using the bathroom. Eventually, that fear became reality. And yet, even then, Morrie faced his condition with astonishing honesty and dignity. He never pretended suffering did not hurt. He simply refused to let suffering turn him cold. We started to push. During their conversations, Mitch often remembered his younger self. Back at Brandeis, he had tried to appear tough and independent. But secretly, he had been searching for tenderness. And Morrie gave it freely. Their relationship had always felt less like teacher and student, and more like father and son. Near the end of his life, when Morrie could barely breathe on his own, he quietly told Mitch, "If I could have another son, I would choose you." Some words enter the heart so deeply, they remain there forever. They were peopler head. Morrie's compassion came partly from the pain of his own childhood. He had grown up poor. His father, Charlie, was emotionally distant and rarely showed affection. When Morrie was only 8 years old, he became the one who had to read the telegram announcing his mother's death, because he was the only person in the family who could read English. Later, his father remarried a gentlewoman named Eva. Eva gave Morrie the warmth and love he desperately needed. She encouraged his love of books and education. But Morrie was forced to keep his mother's death a secret from his younger brother. For years, that silence became a quiet burden inside him. He kept the telegram for the rest of his life as proof that his mother had existed. Perhaps because he grew up starved for affection, Morrie spent the rest of his life giving love away whenever he could. And now, as death approached, he openly sought comfort from family and friends. He allowed people to care for him. He cried often. He held hands with Mitch during their conversations. He no longer cared about appearing strong. Because Morrie understood something most people never learn. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is one of the purest forms of human connection. As the weeks passed, Morrie taught Mitch lesson after lesson. He warned him not to become trapped by popular culture. Modern culture, Morrie believed, teaches people to worship money, status, and superficial success. But none of those things can truly nourish the soul. Instead, Morrie encouraged Mitch to create his own culture, a life built on love, human goodness, compassion, and meaningful relationships. He reminded Mitch again and again, death is not the enemy. The real tragedy is living without love while we are still alive. One Tuesday, Mitch's wife Janine visited with him. Janine was a professional singer, though she rarely sang in front of others. But when Morrie gently asked her to sing, she agreed. As her voice filled the room, Morrie quietly began to cry. Not because he was sad, but because beauty still moved him deeply. Even as his body failed, his heart remained fully alive. My Tubergen. Outside Morrie's window sat a pink hibiscus plant. As the weeks passed, the plant slowly withered alongside him. And Mitch could not stop noticing the symbolism. Life fading quietly. One season ending, another beginning. At the same time, the world outside seemed increasingly filled with anger and violence. Television screens overflowed with murder trials, hatred, division, and fear. But inside Morrie's small study, Mitch discovered a very different way of living. A softer way. A slower way. A more human way. Mitch began recording all of their conversations. Together, they called the project their last thesis. Morrie wanted his lessons to survive after he was gone. And through the book, Tuesdays with Morrie, they eventually would. But it could Meanwhile, Morrie encouraged Mitch to reconnect with his younger brother Peter, who was battling pancreatic cancer alone in Spain. For years, Peter had pushed everyone away. Mitch repeatedly called him, leaving messages that often went unanswered. But Morrie believed healing between the brothers would eventually come. And after Morrie's death, it did. Even near the end, Morrie continued helping people repair the broken places inside their lives. They were Eventually, the final Tuesday arrived. Morrie's body had become terribly weak. Breathing itself required effort. But even then, he continued speaking gently to Mitch. Continued teaching. Continued loving. Soon after, Morrie passed away. Quietly. Peacefully. But for Mitch, the conversations never truly ended. At Morrie's funeral, Mitch found himself speaking silently to his old professor inside his mind. At first, it felt strange. Then, strangely natural. Because some people leave this world, yet somehow remain part of us forever. And perhaps that is the final lesson Morrie wanted to give. That love does not end when a person dies. It continues in memory, in kindness, in the way we choose to live afterward. Sometimes, the people who are leaving this world teach us the most about how to stay fully alive. And maybe that is why Tuesdays with Morrie continues touching hearts around the world even today. Because beneath all the sadness, it reminds us of something deeply human. That in the end, the moments that matter most are rarely the loudest ones. They are the quiet conversations, the gentle hands, the people who made us feel loved, and the simple realization that a meaningful life is not measured by how much we achieve, but by how deeply we learn to care for one another.